For 5 long centuries, Alistair Montgomery was the last pure-blood ruler of his kind. The most powerful women in the world came to him. They offered him the strength of emperors and the blood of ancient families. He turned every one of them away. He was waiting for a special soul. He had not felt that kind of soul since the year 1523. The woman who would finally break his old curse did not even have a voice. Deep in the misty mountains of the Hudson Valley stands the Rosecliff estate. It is a huge, dark Gothic house that does not appear on any modern map. Local people whisper about the Montgomery family. They say these reclusive billionaires paid for the Industrial Revolution. They say the family helped the Astors during the Panic of 1907. They say the Montgomerys quietly controlled private banks across Europe. But the real truth was much darker and much older. Alistair Montgomery was not only a rich tech leader or a lonely rich heir. He was a vampire king. For exactly 500 years, he had sat on a hidden throne made of shadow and silk. He ruled a broken underworld that asked only one thing from him: a child to continue his line. Every 10 years a secret selection was held. Only the richest and most powerful people knew about it. Daughters from the strongest families on earth, the DuPonts, the Sinclairs, and the hidden royal houses of Eastern Europe, were brought to Rosecliff. They arrived covered in diamonds and full of fierce ambition. They offered their blood, their loyalty, and their bodies to the immortal king. For 500 years, Alistair refused every single one. He did more than refuse them. He broke them. With one look, he could hear the true thoughts of anyone near him. In 1922, the beautiful Lady Victoria Cavendish knelt before him. He did not hear a promise of love. He heard her careful plans to poison him and take his money. In 1985, the lovely Isabella Rossi offered her neck. He heard only the empty pride of a woman who wanted to stay young forever. Alistair hated the loud noise of human greed. The world was too loud, too selfish, and too easy to predict. His heart had been frozen in his chest for hundreds of years. He was ready to end his own long life because he was tired of the endless line of lying brides. Then the estate hired new houseworkers for the 2024 selection gala. One of them was Clara Hayes. Clara was 23 years old. Her hair was the color of roasted chestnuts. Her eyes looked like broken storm clouds. She did not come from money. She did not belong to any secret group. She was a survivor. 10 years earlier, a terrible car crash on a wet Pennsylvania highway had killed both of her parents. The trauma of being trapped in the wreck for 2 full days had taken something else from her: her voice. She suffered from deep psychogenic mutism. She had not spoken one single word since she was 13. To live in a world that always wanted noise, Clara made herself invisible. She learned to walk without a sound. She learned to clean a room without moving the air. She learned to hide in the shadows of the big houses where she worked. The Rosecliff estate paid its workers a very high wage. They only had to sign strict secret papers and never look the master of the house in the eye. For Clara, this place felt like paradise. She liked the quiet. It was a Tuesday evening near the end of October, only 3 days before the selection gala. The whole manor was busy with preparation. Thousands of white roses were coming from Ecuador. Crystal chandeliers were being cleaned by many maids. Clara had been told to clean the West Wing library. That room was usually forbidden, but the head housekeeper was desperate for help. The library was a huge space that smelled of old paper and old leather. Clara moved through it like a quiet ghost. Her feather duster touched the spines of first-edition books by Shakespeare and Galileo. She felt completely calm. In her mind she hummed a silent tune. It was a way she organized her thoughts. The heavy oak doors had not opened, yet the feeling in the room changed. It became thick and hard to breathe. Alistair Montgomery stood in the doorway. He was strikingly handsome. He had sharp, noble features, black hair like a raven's wing, and eyes the color of bruised violets. He wore a simple, fine suit, but he moved with the careful power of a hungry wolf. He had come to the library to escape the painful mental noise of the arriving brides. Their thoughts already filled the lower floors like a swarm of hungry insects. Alistair closed his eyes and waited for the usual flood of scared or greedy thoughts from the maid he sensed nearby. He reached out with his mind, ready to wipe her memory of him and send her away. But when his telepathy touched Clara's mind, Alistair stepped back hard. He had to hold the doorframe to stay upright. There was no noise, no racing fear, no plans about money or worry about his strong presence. Instead, Alistair heard a gentle symphony. Because Clara could not speak, her inner world was a bright, wide canvas of feelings and senses. Alistair did not hear words. He felt the soft, steady hum of a cello playing a sad song. He saw bright flashes of color, the exact shade of the autumn leaves outside. He felt the memory of the leather books under her hands. It was the most beautiful and pure mental safe place he had found in 500 years. Clara turned and saw him for the first time. She did not gasp. She did not drop her duster. She simply stood still. Her wide, stormy eyes met his violet ones. She gave a small, polite curtsy and kept her gaze steady. "Who are you?" Alistair sent the thoughts straight into her mind. That trick usually made people scream in fear. Clara blinked, a little surprised, but she did not panic. Her mind simply formed a gentle, curious picture. A small brown field mouse looking up at a tall, dark storm cloud. For the first time in 500 years, Alistair Montgomery smiled. The strong feeling that took hold of him was instant and complete. Over the next 2 days, Alistair changed the whole plan of his household just to keep Clara close. He promoted her from general housework to his personal attendant. That job had not been filled since the 1800s. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, looked terrified by the order, but she obeyed at once. Clara found herself serving tea in his private study, sorting his letters, and standing quietly in the corner while he held hard business meetings with world leaders and tech bosses. She had no idea what he really was. She only thought her boss was a strange, very intense billionaire who liked a quiet helper. But for Alistair, Clara was a cool oasis in a desert of pain. When the mental noise of the estate grew too strong, when the plotting thoughts of the arriving rich brides gave him blinding headaches, he would call for Clara. He would sit in his leather chair, close his eyes, and simply listen to the deep, beautiful quiet of her mind. She thought in feelings, in colors, in memories of rain tapping on a window. She was pure. She was free of the darkness of his world. But the peace could not last. The selection gala arrived. The grand ballroom of Rosecliff Estate became a shining show of wealth and power. Orchestras played, champagne flowed, the oldest vampire families mixed with human billionaires who wanted immortal favors. At the center of it all stood Genevieve Sinclair. Genevieve was the strongest candidate for the throne. Her family controlled the largest private blood banks in Northern Europe. She was stunningly beautiful, with icy blonde hair and a smile that could freeze water. She had spent the last 50 years preparing to become Alistair's queen, and she was fiercely protective of that plan. As the night went on, Alistair sat on a raised velvet seat, looking very bored as one bride after another was presented to him. He could hear their minds. "I will finally have his wealth," thought a Russian countess. "I will control the North American vampire groups," planned a French heiress. Standing in the shadows behind a large marble pillar, holding a silver tray of clean crystal glasses, was Clara. She wore a simple black uniform that looked out of place among the silk and diamonds. She watched the rich display with quiet interest. Her mind was busy with the way the chandelier light broke into rainbows on the polished floor. Alistair completely ignored the beautiful Genevieve, who was talking to him. He kept looking past her shoulder toward the pillar. He was shutting out Genevieve's voice on purpose, so he could rest in the calm colors of Clara's thoughts. Genevieve had the sharp instincts of a hunter. She noticed his distraction. She followed his gaze and saw the plain, invisible human maid in the corner. She felt insulted and angry. She decided to make an example of the girl. "Excuse me, Alistair, darling," Genevieve said softly. She turned away from the raised seat and walked straight toward Clara. The crowd moved aside for her. They felt the sudden change in the air. Clara realized someone was coming. She lowered her head politely and held out the tray of glasses. Genevieve did not take a glass. Instead, with a quick, cruel flick of her wrist, she knocked the silver tray out of Clara's hands. The heavy crystal glasses smashed hard against the marble floor. The sharp sound rang through the suddenly quiet ballroom. "You clumsy, useless creature," Genevieve hissed loudly so everyone could hear. "Look what you have done. Clean it up. Use your hands." Clara dropped to her knees at once. She was shaking, but her face stayed calm. She reached out to pick up the sharp pieces of crystal. She lifted the high heel of her fancy shoe, ready to step right onto Clara's bare hand as she gathered the glass. But Genevieve's foot never touched the floor. A force like a small hurricane tore through the ballroom. The heavy oak doors slammed shut so hard their frames broke. The crystal chandeliers flickered and went out, leaving the room in strange, unnatural twilight. In less than a second, Alistair was no longer on his throne. He stood right in front of Clara. His hand was locked tightly around Genevieve's throat, holding the immortal heiress a full foot off the ground. The room filled with shocked gasps, but no one dared move. Alistair's eyes were no longer violet. They glowed a terrifying red. The veins under his pale skin turned black with rage. He did not shout. When he spoke, his voice was a low, deadly rumble that shook the chest of every person in the room. "If you ever look at her again," Alistair said to the choking Genevieve, "I will pull your heart out through your spine and feed it to the dogs." He threw Genevieve aside like a broken doll. She crashed into a tower of champagne glasses, covered in glass and expensive wine, completely shamed. Alistair turned his back on the richest and most powerful vampires in the world. He knelt on the floor, not caring that the sharp crystal cut into his fine trousers. He gently took Clara's shaking hands in his own and pulled her away from the broken glass. "Are you hurt?" His voice sounded soft in her mind, free of the wild anger he had just shown. Clara stared at him, her chest rising and falling fast. For the first time, she truly saw what he was. She saw the slightly long teeth, the unnatural speed, the glowing red of his eyes fading back to violet. But amazingly, her mind did not fill with fear. It filled with something far more dangerous: kindness. In Alistair's mind, he felt Clara's answer. It was a picture of a strong, protective lion standing guard over a small, hurt bird. It was a feeling of deep, pure thanks. Without a word, Alistair stood up and pulled Clara up with him. He looked out at the sea of shocked rich people, the 500 years of bloodlines, wealth, and power that had tried to claim him. "The selection is over," Alistair said in a voice that left no room for argument. "Get out of my house." He turned and walked out of the ballroom, keeping Clara's hand tightly in his. He did not care about the political trouble that would follow. He did not care that he had just started a war with the Sinclair family. He cared only about the silent woman walking beside him. But as they disappeared into the dark hallways of the manor, Genevieve Sinclair pulled herself out of the ruined champagne tower. Her eyes burned with poisonous, killing hate. The vampire king had refused them all for a broken, mute human. Genevieve swore to the old gods of their kind that she would make sure Clara Hayes never left Rosecliff estate alive. The morning after the ruined selection gala, the money markets of the human world shook for no clear reason. Trillions of dollars moved across secret accounts. Stocks in Sinclair Pharmaceuticals fell hard, while Montgomery Holdings took big losses in European real estate. To the regular news people on CNN and Bloomberg, it looked like a sudden fierce company war. To the hidden elite, it was promise of total supernatural destruction. Inside the strong walls of the Rosecliff estate, the air felt heavy. Alistair had moved Clara into the master wing, a large set of rooms with dark wood, soft velvet, and glass that could stop bullets. The rooms looked out over the Hudson River. For the first time in her life, Clara was not serving. She was being served. Still, she refused the silk dresses and diamond jewelry that Alistair's remaining staff tried to give her. She asked only for a simple soft sweater and a pair of blue jeans. Alistair spent the next 2 days walking back and forth in his big study, planning a fierce defense against the Sinclair family's revenge. The Sinclairs were more than rich. They used secret meetings of powerful people as a cover to control global blood supply routes. Genevieve's father, Lord Arthur Sinclair, owned many private politicians in Washington and London. They were gathering a hired army of wild vampires, heavily armed human fighters, and crooked federal agents to attack Rosecliff. Yet whenever Alistair felt the old monster rage rising in his chest, he would go to Clara's room. He found her sitting on the balcony floor that afternoon, drawing the storm clouds gathering over the valley. Alistair sat beside her. His fine suit looked strange against the rough stone. He did not speak out loud. He did not need to. "I owe you an explanation," his voice said gently in her mind. Clara looked up. Her pencil stopped. Her mind showed an open meadow, a sign that she was listening and felt no fear. Alistair looked out at the darkening sky, the weight of 5 centuries pressed on his shoulders. "I was not born a monster, Clara. I was human once, a small lord in Florence during the Italian Renaissance. In 1523, a plague swept through our city. It was not a disease. It was a group of vampires. They killed my family. But the leader of the group, a creature full of pure cruelty, decided my punishment for fighting back would be endless life. He turned me into a vampire and forced me to watch everyone I loved grow old and die while I stayed the same. I spent the next 200 years hunting him down. Then I spent the next 300 years gathering enough wealth and power so that no group could ever control my life again. But the curse of my bloodline is loneliness. My telepathy makes it impossible to stand the company of others. I hear every lie, every greedy wish, every dark thought of every human and immortal soul. It is a loud, painful roar. Until I met you." Clara reached out. Her warm, delicate fingers touched the cold, marble-like skin of his jaw. In her mind she did not offer pity. Pity was useless. Instead she offered a deep, strong feeling of acceptance. She showed him a mental picture of a dark, empty fortress, finally opening its gates to the sunlight. For the first time since 1523, Alistair felt a tear form in his eye. He leaned into her touch, completely disarmed by the silent maid who held more strength than 1,000 immortal kings. But their fragile safe place was about to be torn apart. At exactly midnight, the outer alarms of Rosecliff Estate went dead. There was no siren, no warning, only the sudden, cold silence of a cut power grid. Alistair's head snapped up. His telepathy, which usually reached for miles, was suddenly blocked by a special electronic jammer. It was a military-grade device made only by a Sinclair company. "They are here," Alistair sent into Clara's mind. His whole manner changed at once from a gentle lover to a top predator. "Stay in this room. The glass is strong. Do not open the door for anyone but me." Before Clara could nod, Alistair vanished, nothing but a blur of shadow leaving the room. Downstairs, the grand entrance hall had become a place of death. Dozens of heavily armed hired fighters, carrying special UV bullets that burned, broke through the mahogany doors. With them came 5 Sinclair enforcers, old, deadly vampires hired to hold Alistair down. Alistair fell on them like an angry god. He used no weapons. He was the weapon. He moved faster than human eyes could follow, breaking necks and tearing through strong body armor with his bare hands. The hall was covered in blood and the flash of gunfire. But it was only a distraction. While Alistair carefully destroyed the attack team on the ground floor, Genevieve Sinclair had already gone around the main house. She had forced Rosecliff's head of security, a human named Miller who had huge secret gambling debts to a real crime family, to give her the special codes to the upper floors. Clara stood near the fireplace, holding a heavy iron poker. Her heart beat hard against her ribs. The strong doors of the master suite did not explode open. They simply clicked. The electronic lock glowed green as it was overridden. Genevieve stepped into the room. She wore sleek black fighting clothes. Her blonde hair was pulled back. Her fangs were fully out. She looked at Clara and smiled. A terrifying, empty smile. "Did you really think," Genevieve said softly as she stepped inside, "that a mute little human could steal the throne from a Sinclair and live to see the weekend?" Clara did not step back. She held the iron poker tighter. Her knuckles turned white. She could not scream for help, and even if she could, the loud battle downstairs would have drowned out every sound. "He's busy," Genevieve sneered, slowly walking around Clara like a cat playing with a hurt mouse. "My father sent 50 men to die downstairs just to buy me 3 minutes with you. You ruined my future, you little rat. You shamed me in front of the whole group." Clara swung the heavy iron poker with all the strength she had. It was a fast, desperate strike, aimed straight at Genevieve's head. But human speed was nothing to a vampire. Genevieve caught the iron rod with one hand. Her face looked bored. With a hard twist, she pulled it from Clara's hands and threw it across the room. It smashed a priceless old Chinese vase. Before Clara could move, Genevieve's hand shot out. Her fingers locked around Clara's throat. She lifted the human girl off the ground and pinned her against the silk-covered wall. Clara choked. Her hands clawed desperately at Genevieve's iron grip. Black spots began to dance in her vision. "I'm going to drain you dry," Genevieve whispered. Her breath was cold against Clara's cheek. "And when Alistair comes back, I'm going to make him watch me burn your lifeless body to ashes." Genevieve lunged forward. Her fangs sank deep into the soft skin of Clara's neck. Sharp, blinding pain exploded through Clara's whole body. She could feel her life force, her very heartbeat, being violently pulled from her veins. Her mind, usually a quiet, safe place of colors and music, erupted into a wild, terrifying storm of static and fading light. 2 floors below, Alistair had just pulled the heart from the chest of the last Sinclair enforcer. He was covered in blood, his chest heaving, when a psychic shock hit him. It was not a thought. It was the sudden, horrible feeling of Clara's mental symphony being silenced. A huge, unnatural roar tore from Alistair's throat. The sound shattered every remaining window on the ground floor. He did not run up the stairs. He launched himself straight up through the building, crashing through the ceiling of the entrance hall and bursting through the wooden floor of the master suite. He arrived in a shower of broken wood and plaster. Genevieve dropped Clara in shock and spun around just as Alistair crashed into her. The impact was like a freight train. Alistair tackled Genevieve through the strong glass of the balcony. The reinforced panes shattered outward into the night sky. They crashed onto the stone terrace, fighting in a blur of supernatural violence. Genevieve fought with the desperation of a trapped animal, but she was no match for a 500-year-old king filled with pure, raw grief. Alistair did not hesitate. He grabbed Genevieve by her blonde hair, forced her to her knees, and with one hard final motion, cut her head from her shoulders. The Sinclair heiress crumbled into a pile of gray ash that blew away in the autumn wind. Alistair did not stop to watch her burn. He ran back into the ruined bedroom and dropped to his knees beside Clara. She lay on the floor, her skin terribly pale. A pool of dark red blood spread under her neck. Her eyes were half open, staring blankly at the ceiling. The mental link between them was frighteningly weak, just a dying spark in the dark. "Clara," Alistair begged. His hands shook as he pressed them against her wound to stop the bleeding. "Clara, look at me. Stay with me, please." For 500 years, Alistair Montgomery had controlled empires. He had started wars, moved world money, and commanded the fierce creatures of the night. But kneeling on the floor, covered in blood, he was completely powerless. He was just a man watching the only light he had ever known go out. Clara's eyes flickered and found his. In her mind, the grand, beautiful symphony she usually played for him was fading into one single, desperate note of sadness. She did not want to leave him. She knew that without her, he would sink back into the loud darkness, and this time he would not survive it. The mental trauma that had locked her vocal cords for 10 years was a cage built on fear. But in this final moment, looking into the tear-filled eyes of the immortal king who loved her, that fear disappeared. It was replaced by an overwhelming, desperate need to comfort him. Clara reached up. Her blood-stained fingers touched his cheek. Her lips parted. She drew a shallow, painful breath, fighting against a decade of silence, fighting against the growing grip of death. And then she spoke. Her voice was raw, rough, and incredibly fragile. It broke the silence of the room like a crack of thunder. "Save me." Alistair froze. The sound of her real voice hit him like a physical blow. It was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. "I will," Alistair swore. His eyes glowed with a fierce, bright red. "I am going to bring you into the dark, my love. But you will never be alone." Alistair bit into his own wrist, tearing the flesh until his immortal blood welled up, thick, dark, and full of ancient power. He pressed his bleeding wrist to Clara's pale lips. "Drink," he said softly. Clara swallowed the blood. It tasted like copper and liquid fire. The moment it entered her bloodstream, her body shook hard. The change from human to immortal is a brutally violent process, a war between life and death inside every cell. Alistair pulled her into his lap, wrapped his arms tightly around her, and rocked her as the fever took her. He stayed with her for 3 days and 3 nights, while her body burned and rebuilt itself. He ignored the frantic calls from the Vampire Council. He ignored the trouble caused by Genevieve Sinclair's death. He focused only on the woman in his arms. On the evening of the 4th day, the storm ended. Clara opened her eyes. They were no longer the color of stormy gray clouds. They were a bright, mesmerizing shade of crimson that slowly faded into a deep, brilliant violet, the exact color of Alistair's. She took a deep breath and felt the unnatural strength coiling in her muscles. The physical world was overwhelmingly loud now. She could hear the heartbeat of a deer miles away in the forest, and the soft sound of leaves falling to the ground. But when she looked at Alistair, sitting beside the bed, tired and worried, the noise faded. Alistair held his breath, afraid of what the change might have done to her mind. Clara. He reached out with his mind, ready for the dark, greedy noise that filled all vampires. Instead, he was flooded with the triumphant, deafening roar of a grand orchestra playing a rising song of pure joy. Her mind was still pure. The vampirism had not corrupted her soul. It had only made its beauty stronger. Clara sat up, moving with a smooth, predatory grace that belonged to a queen. She looked at Alistair. A soft, confident smile touched her lips. "I hear you," Clara said out loud. Her voice was clear and musical. Alistair let out a breath he felt he had been holding for centuries. He pulled her into a desperate, passionate kiss, a promise sealed in blood and shadows. The world of the elite vampires would never be the same. The Sinclair family demanded a war, but when Alistair Montgomery came out of the Rosecliff estate a week later, he did not come alone. Clara stood beside him, no longer an invisible maid, but a sovereign queen. She possessed a mental power that brought the oldest vampires to their knees. For 500 years, the Vampire King had waited in the deafening noise of the world. Now he ruled it, guided by the woman whose silence had saved his soul, and whose voice would echo through eternity. Psychogenic mutism is a real condition in which a person loses the ability to speak because of severe emotional trauma, even though their vocal cords and brain language centers work normally. It is not the same as choosing to stay silent. Recovery often happens when the person feels completely safe and deeply connected to another person. Clara's story shows how true acceptance and emotional safety can unlock what fear has locked away. It also reminds us that listening carefully, without needing constant words, can be one of the most powerful forms of care a person can give or receive. If you enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up, share it, and subscribe so you don't miss my next video.